All right, excellent. Hello, everyone. My name's Olaf Alders, and today I'm just gonna talk to you, make some random observations about Perl, and where we were, where we're at now, where we're going. I had this talk all nicely kind of planned out, and then I talked to Neil Bowers the other day, and that just threw everything into confusion. So I've got too many slides. We'll try and power our way through those. First slide. Okay, so essentially where we're at with Perl is it's safe to say that Perl's market share has been in decline for a long time. It used to be an obvious choice for a lot of things. It's not necessarily the obvious choice anymore. Over time, a lot more programming languages have become available, and which is a natural sort of state of affairs. There's no going back. Sometimes I hear people say we don't want to restore Perl to its former glory, but I think that's not in the cards. Perl, I think, was in the right place at the right time, and it filled a need, and it became quite popular, and now we're just sort of seeing a downwards trend after that, probably more of a correction than anything else. But that doesn't mean that Perl is finished as a language. So there's always the kind of is Perl dead conversation. Life and death are kind of binary states, and I think that's kind of hard to project onto a language. Can a language really die? Is Latin dead? I took Latin in high school. I took Latin in university. Latin still lives on in various forms and terminology, and still has a huge influence on other languages. If you speak German at all, you know that the verb goes at the end of the sentence. That's sort of influence from Latin. If you're in a university lecture in Germany, it makes it very hard to know what's going on when there's a very, very long convoluted sentence, and you will not get the meaning of it until the very last word. So lingering effect of Latin. But I mean, maybe it's helpful to think of languages in terms of life cycles. Where are we at in the Perl life cycle? Do languages come to a natural conclusion at some point? So instead of saying is language X dead, I think maybe it's not the right question. When I was in university, I was discussing a thesis for a paper with a professor, and he said, well, that's the right answer, but are you asking the right question? So I think in these kinds of situations, it's probably more helpful to say, is this the language, is it appropriate for what I want to do? Will this help me accomplish my goals? Rather than saying, is the language alive or is it dead? I think from a business perspective, if I'm going to do something in language X, I just want to know if it's suitable. Sort of general health of the language and activity of the community is part of that, but I want to know, is it fast enough? Is it going to be okay with the resources that I have available? Sometimes the language that you prototype with is not the language that you scale with. So I think that's fine too. Perl's great for getting something up and running quickly. It might not scale to millions and millions of requests per day as well as something else. But it's good to have, and I don't necessarily see it as a failure if you write something in language A and then move it to language B afterwards as part of your scale. So we do kind of tend to see this Perl to Java or Go or some other language rewrite in the life cycle of applications as well. Sort of the lasting impact over time is that we do start losing some financial backing. If you've got a corporation that's a big donor financially to the Perl ecosystem and they feel like they no longer need a stake in the success of the language, then they might move their dollars somewhere else. And those will sort of have knock-on effects in the coming years. And we do, as a collection of communities, need some level of funding to go ahead. So I used to always say Perl community. Neil Bowers wrote a blog post once saying that there is no such thing as a Perl community. It's sort of, it's more Perl communities. It's like this collection of tribes that are sort of loosely connected. And I think that's maybe a good way to think of the Perl ecosystem. But whatever you call it, we need some money. And the donations do matter a lot. They matter for grants. They matter for this kind of a conference. I was involved a little bit in the fundraising for this conference, just even infrastructure for hosting the applications that you have. And money is better than in-kind donations, which can disappear. when we started Meta CPAN, we first started here in Toronto. We had a conversation. We heard about this thing called Elasticsearch, and we were going to try it out. And so we made an API for the CPAN. We kind of passed the hat around in a bar one night. I think I got $60 from everybody there, and I got a cloud instance going, and we started the Elasticsearch server in an instance of Screen, and that was basically it. Eventually, then somebody said that's not how you do this. And Clinton Gormley, I think it was, he had a friend with a hosting company. They got us some free hosting, so then we had bare metal. But that changed ownership at some point, and they gave us 60 days to find something new. And if you have money, then you don't have to deal with those kinds of emergencies as quite as much. So let's have a look at some language activity indicators. When I sat down to do this, I emailed Neil. He used to do this kind of annual charting of CPAN activity to see sort of where we're at. He didn't do it for 2022, and so I asked if he could just do it easily, and then he's just started emailing me all these charts. And let's just kind of quickly go through some of these. Basically, you can see his last report is at that link. And yeah, let's just have a look. So pause signups per year. Before we start this, I just want to say it's not the only indicator for the health of the ecosystem, but people pushing code is to pause particularly is probably a good indicator. So you can see that basically there's a fairly healthy number of signups until around the year 2012, and then after that it starts to taper off, and then there's a pretty steep drop, and then it seems pretty steady as of 2020. There's one interesting spike in there, which I think is around 2012, where I believe there was intermediate Perl was published, and there is a part in there that says get yourself a pause account and release a module that's an ACB module. And again, let's look at first-time releasers per year. We see that same kind of spike there. Again, possibly correlated with intermediate Perl, and then you can see it is kind of leveled off for the last 2 years. Looks like it actually slightly went up in 2022. And then we've got CPAN releasers per year. So the previous one was, first-time releasers per year, and now we have just people releasing in general. So you can see in 2022, it is over 600. It's probably close to 700 people. So it's not nothing. I mean, people are still active, but it's not like the peak of about 1,800. Number of authors creating at least one new distribution per year. So this is kind of new art that's being uploaded to CPAN. And again, you can see that definitely, it's just all following the same pattern. New users monthly on a rolling 12-month average. Again, this sort of illustrates more of a steeper decline. And you can see that looks like, at this point, it's less than 10 new users to pause in a month. First-time CPAN releasers per month. So this sort of roughly correlates to the new users. These are the new releasers. I should add to this, I don't know, how many people here have pause accounts? Okay, so I won't have to explain too much to you, but it is kind of unique pause in the sense that you need to ask for an account. You can't just start uploading stuff. There is like a human being who's gatekeeping. And if that person is sick, you'll have to wait a little bit. New users who have never released is kind of interesting. Again, possibly that intermediate Perl effect there around 2013. And then you're looking at like over 100 people last year who got an account but never actually did anything with it, or haven't yet, put it that way. Number of times each pause user has released something. A lot, almost half of the pause users are in that 0 bucket. You can see that it's only about a quarter who have released 10 or more times. Now, this is how many different distributions pause users have released. It excludes the people who have never released. So you can see that the biggest bucket is people who release once. So it could possibly sometimes be these Acme distributions, but it's also somebody who has like one particular itch that they want to scratch. Not everybody wants to become that person who has 100 modules on CPAN. They just have one thing that they care about or one thing they're really good at, and they upload it. Now, for people who do at least one release, how long was it between them signing up and doing the first release? So we've got the first day, we've got the first week, but not in the first day. We've got in the first month. So you can see that usually within the first month, that people will release something, usually within the first year. The 3-year plus there's some kind of an anomaly in possibly people who release some bad packages. So you think you could ignore that, but basically people want to get up and running when they get their accounts. And here's sort of, you can see kind of like the long tail of that time to release, usually within the first week there. And lifetime releases per author, again, half of this chart is people that are doing, 8 or releases or less in their over the course so far. Most of us are still here. So one thing to consider also is that certain demographic here at the conference today probably reflects pause users, and there are people that are eventually headed towards retirement. What kind of plans do we have for their modules, as we possibly have less active pause users but still have libraries that need to be maintained. On that note, CPAN Day is on August the 16th. That's the anniversary of the first upload to CPAN, and so if you haven't released anything this year, maybe think about fixing a bug somewhere. Now, what keeps people from releasing? There is a certain amount of friction creating a new CPAN distribution. With other languages, you don't necessarily have the same kind of barriers. If anyone's tried to create like a Rust crate, it's kind of pretty easy to do. You just type something in and the scaffolding gets created for you. You want to publish a Go module, you're basically just pushing some code to GitHub, and there's not really too much more to it than that. But for us, I mean, you could use really any one of these distributions to get started. And if you Google it, you may not consistently get the same one. Now, the last one is an outlier. That's something that Ingi did, and he claims he's the only one using it. The command is it's like disil, but instead of typing dzil, you type zil to. Okay, so all right, so I've already given you bad information. Okay, no, so, and even when it comes down to installing modules, how would you tell someone you could use CPAN, you could use CPAN plus, you could use CPAN minus, you could use CPM? One thing this illustrates is that we like quirky names and we like jokes, because if you've got CPAN and then you've got CPAN plus, and your improvement on CPAN plus is then CPAN minus, and then the improvement on that is CPM, which I believe is actually named sort of like the same way as Node is. It's sort of an ode to that. But how do you explain to a new user that which tool you want? Like, would it be possible to standardize on some of these things? Like TimTody is good, but it's not always great, and it can be quite overwhelming for someone who's new to Perl. Even the nomenclature that we have pause, we have CPAN, we have meta CPAN. Do people really care what the difference is between these things? Like, it matters to people who need to understand sort of the underlying parts of it. But when somebody goes to meta CPAN, a lot of people just refer to that as CPAN, because kind of that actually is what it is. So I think we can do better in not forcing people to jump through a lot of hoops. One of the thoughts that Neil shared was that when CPAN first came into existence, people were used to having to do hard things to get their software published. That's not really the case today. If I can just create a repo and push it to GitHub and have my Go modules picked up, that seems a lot easier. And also with Go, if I want to fork a module, I can just fork that thing on GitHub and then pull it into my code. We don't really have that luxury. So what I want to talk about a bit today is we can't fix everything. Where's kind of some low-hanging fruit? What can we do better? But I also want to just talk about the state of the community. So what about books? I was thinking that, there haven't been any Perl books published in a long time, but I did actually have a quick look, and there was this advanced Perl programming that was published in 2020. I'd never heard of it, but it's there. Learning Perl was updated 2 years ago. That's not that far off. So I guess O'Reilly still cares to some degree about Perl. There's also self-publishing. So that second one is not a Perl book, but Dave is in the community, and I think he's self-publishing some other stuff. So these are quite recent updates to these books. So it's not all doom and gloom. Let's look at conferences. Now, you're at one right now. That's a good thing. And there will be another one next year, I understand. No announcements made yet, but that's my impression. So I think that in North America, conferences are healthy. Now, and I had kind of assumed there wasn't really much going on in Asia because I'd heard that YAPC Asia was coming to a conclusion. But then I looked, there was a YAPC Japan online in 2022. There was a YAPC Kyoto in just a few months ago. And Kugad was saying, was it the online one where everyone got the food deliveries at the same time? Yeah. Yeah, it was that's amazing. People were watching this conference online, and then exactly the same time they all got a delivery of food to their door. Yeah. So anyway, just that kind of blew my mind. It's such a great idea. YAPC EU, I know there was nobody who came forward to take that on, but now there is a Perl and Koha conference in Finland this year, so that's also encouraging. I had a look at Perlmongers, so pm.org could use some love. If you look at it, it looks like there's nothing really going on. The calendar is basically empty, and so I thought, well, I know something about Canada, so I'll look at the Monger groups, and every single one of them was either outdated or pointed to a website that didn't exist. It includes toronto.pm, which obviously, well, to me, obviously still exists. So I created a pull request for pm.org, and that got merged within a day. So if you are in a local PM group, and I would say maybe have a look at pm.org and see if there's any information there that can be updated. I think in some cases people have moved to meetup.com rather than the PM addresses, and those would need to be updated there so that we don't give people the impression that we don't exist. There's a meetup group that's like just a half hour from my house, and I assume it's been dead for years. Apparently not. So, but going by pm.org, you would think so. If you go to Perl Reddit, this is actually 32 online, pretty active for Reddit as far as in my experience. But it's got over 16,000 members. So I don't know how many are bots or whatever, but over time it did accrue a number of people, but they don't check back regularly to that Perl subreddit. And on the whole, I think mostly well-behaved. It is Reddit, and also I have blocked a few people, so that makes it really look a lot cleaner to me. Perl.com, this one's kind of interesting. So the last article is here. You can see this one by Thibault. It was over a year ago. And the interesting thing about Perl.com is that it's powered by Hugo, which is a static site generator. So Perl.com is easy for anyone to pull down, deploy, and mess around with and create articles for. The problem is that nobody's in charge of Perl.com. There's no leadership, there's no ownership, there's no direction for it. It's looking for a new owner. So if you feel motivated in that way, it's definitely available. Now, one thing I miss about Perl.com was they had these What's New on CPAN articles where David Farrell would categorize modules that have been new uploads in a given month, and he would give you these really helpful summaries. So these aren't just the summaries from the modules themselves. He's actually gone and explained what they do. And I think something like this actually helps encourage adoption of new modules. Sort of interesting point. This article was published in June 2020, which is also, or I think it covers June. That was the month that Sawyer announced Perl 7. And after that, things kind of tanked in a lot of ways. I'm not saying that this is related to it, but I know I actually lost a lot of motivation right around that time as well. And I would love to see these back. I don't think it's David Farrell who would be doing it, just from my conversations with him. So yeah, can we revive this? What I really think is doable with not much effort is that we would just hire someone. We hire someone to do those blog posts once a month, and then we pay someone to edit them as well, because you do need an editor for these kinds of things. We could probably cover the cost with just selling space in the footer for sponsors. It's the same way we do with Meta CPAN. That actually, in that case, is a successful advertising model. So for Meta CPAN, we don't necessarily hunt down sponsors. Usually people come to us and they say, how can we get our logo on your page? And then we say, you can go here to Open Collective and you can make a donation, a recurring donation, and then we'll keep you on the front page. And so that for us has generated a fair amount of income. I'm confident we could get $2,000 or $3,000 a year for.
I volunteer to do this.
Sorry?
I volunteer to do this.
You okay, perfect. We will talk. All right, thanks, Alan. Okay, so and why would we want to hire someone? Because if you pay someone, you can make some demands on them. It's one way to give back some cash to open source developers. And also, if you have the logos on the bottom, you're giving some exposure to companies that still are helpful to Perl. And there are companies that are having problems hiring, and they are looking for that kind of exposure, and they're willing to pay for it. So can we do something more with Perl.com? Could we make it a springboard for all things Perl? Because right now you've got Perl.com, and you've got like learn.perl, and you've got a lot of different hobby projects and places that people have put their things, but they're not necessarily kept up to date, and they give conflicting information. I would think, as a person new to Perl, if I came to Perl.com and saw that it hasn't been updated in a year, I would wonder, are the lights still on in this place? So this could be a good spot as a starting point to try and have a unified approach to Perl. Thanks. And just as an example, the books page on learn.perl doesn't have any books published after 2016 when clearly there have been. So there, as far as I can tell, there's not really anyone who owns learn.perl as well. You're sending a pull request to the Perl NOC if you want to update that site. And I think to do that, you'll have to deploy an application locally if you want to test it using a framework called Combust. So it's not, there are hoops to jump through to be able to update that site. So you've got to feel pretty strongly about it if you want to do that first. And I think in this day and age, we don't necessarily need custom web frameworks when all we're looking for is some templating. There's enough static site generators to do that. I don't really believe in dog fooding either. Like, I think that if there's something that does the trick, it doesn't have to be Perl. I kind of thought that blogs.perl.org could have just become a WordPress installation at some point when it was problematic, and we could have just moved on with our lives. Now, sort of a different side of the story is perladvent.org. Now, this is actually, it makes me so excited, this website, because it was first published in 2000. This is Mark Fowler, who decided to give himself a Christmas gift and write an article on, it wasn't even articles in 2000, he was literally publishing pod from different modules that were on CPAN, and was one a day. And that grew, and it has been published every year since then. And I've got to think this is one of the oldest code advent calendars, if not the oldest. So we hit a bump in the road in 2021 where Mark published an article on December the 1st, and then that was it. We didn't hear from him. I don't know why. He's a busy guy. Life happens. It's fine. He did not owe us another 23 articles, but that's sort of the way it went. And I used to work with him, and I did reach out to him through a colleague, and he said, I said I'd like to help. And he said, well, how about you just take it over? And so I was able to take it over last year, and then we actually ended up with 27 articles. So we had a bumper crop, which was great, and people were excited to be able to write this. But the way that we did this was, it's a lot of work for one person, so I just started recruiting people. I didn't even necessarily ask for volunteers. I just messaged people privately saying, like, would you like to do this? I messaged some people and say, could you write an article? Could you edit an article? And we moved it into a GitHub org. It had been hosted somewhere on like a Fastmail server or something somewhere. So we just moved it to GitHub as well. And it's now just set up with GitHub Actions. So when there's a merge, it just deploys a new version of the website. And so you just need people to publish articles, people to review them, and then click merge on it. And that's maybe a simplification. But now it kind of basically works without nearly as much hassle. And now if I disappear, this still could be run without me. There's no single point of failure in a human because it's an organization with lots of admins. And I feel like that's a good pattern. And on that note, the call for papers is now open. We do have to start these things early because it is a lot of work just coordinating all the people with the articles. So mark it on your calendars. If you want to publish an article, you can just go to the Perl Advent GitHub and just open an issue, and then we'll take it from there. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And it doesn't have to be about Christmas. It totally can, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so now we have an issue with bus numbers, and we had added this bus number metric to Meta CPAN a while back. And so you can see there, the bus factor on DBI is 1. And that means that of all the people who can release DBI, only one person has released anything to CPAN in the last 2 years. So that's basically an indicator of, if I use this, is it likely to be updated, right? So DBI is a very, very important module. And I'm not saying that Tim's MIA, but what I'm saying is that 1's not always a number that I'm comfortable with. And can we do better on some of these things? There are also projects this sort of like the classic XKCD comic about everything hinging on some project maintained in some place by one person, and we don't possibly even know who this person is. So CPAN testers is kind of one of those things. Doug Bell took it over from Barbie. We've tried to get some volunteers to help him, but no success. And that is a very important project. We would notice if that went away. Devel cover and CPAN cover, that's Paul Johnson, one of the nicest people I've ever met. And we use this all the time. Like if you run coverage reports and upload them to coveralls or CodeCov, you're basically using Devel cover. And he hasn't asked for help from me, but what I'm telling you is I care about this and I would like it to continue to be healthy. So this is something I would love if more people participated in. PPI, again, is basically one person. I got permissions on this because I really needed some patches in for Perl imports, but there's so much like Perl Critic that depends on this, and with Perl the language evolving, PPI will need some love or need a successor in order to be able to do some of the things that we like to do. So as far as future proofing goes, if you have some site on some server that nobody knows about, just in a static, just push it to GitHub or someplace where people can get to it if something happens to you or if you get busy. You can protect your domain name registration. We'll get into that. And then consider moving everything to a GitHub org so you can give more people permissions and assign co-main on CPAN to people you trust. And recruit. Just ask people if they want to help. So with Meta CPAN, basically everybody who's a core developer is somebody I said, would you like to be a core developer to? So people that were interested, they were already contributing. Not everyone says yes, and not everyone sticks around. But I would say don't be shy. Don't be out there struggling trying to do your thing on your own. Just harass people if you want. Sometimes if it's just like somebody else who has keys to the car, that's helpful to have, and it could lower your stress a lot. Now, beyond bus numbers, what's going on with security? So Brian D. Foy has been involved in the CPAN security advisory to make it more helpful, or easier for us to spot CVEs, and we're hoping to get an integration into Meta CPAN. There's a CPAN security working group, which Ingi will be giving a lightning talk on later. So that will be specifically addressing some security issues. Now, I don't know if you knew prepan.org, but it was a website that you could publish your idea for Module 2 before you publish to CPAN, so hence the prepan. If you go there today, it's not anything about Perl modules. And what happened was the name expired. And it was unfortunate, and there was nothing to be done about it. So what you can do to avoid this in future is just transfer ownership of your Perl-related domains to TPRC. They'll get auto-renewed. It's not going to cost you anything. And this model of failure where your domain doesn't renew because you didn't get that email or whatever, that just disappears, that single point of failure. So if you're...
Did you read the TPRF on the previous one, rather than TPRC?
I did, yeah. I would love if it had just been TPF because that's what I'm used to. But yeah, TPRF, yeah. So now, if you want to do that, you can get on Slack. And here's an invitation that Todd kindly put together. I think it's good for another 26 days. Or you can get in touch with me as well. Now, just a quick quiz here, audience participation. Let's figure out what the official logo for Perl is. And also, if you haven't been to this cafe in Toronto, it's not that far. I hear it's pretty good. Okay, is it the onion? Hands up, it's the onion. Is it some kind of, by the way, I love this. Is it a velociraptor? Is it this? No, is it this? Is it any of those things? Like, is there a really official Perl logo? I don't think that there is. But do we already have a winner? So we could use the camel within certain parameters, and Neil has spoken. So the camel, we know it because it was used on learning Perl, and so people associate Perl with the camel. And so Tim O'Reilly, I guess, has laid out some parameters for the use of the camel. Neil Bowers has been in touch with him, and he's quite confident that we can't use the camel for nefarious purposes, and we can't use it on a book about Perl. So given the market for Perl books, I would say that's basically a non-issue, and it's already basically in use all over the place. It would be nice if we could actually standardize on that. it's kind of low-hanging fruit. It's already there. But to be able to do this, we would have to, who actually makes this decision? Like, who's in charge of Perl? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we'll get to that in a minute, but it is a little bit of a rudderless ship. So, I mean, I could tell you that it's a shadowed camel and that's the logo for Perl, but that's just my opinion. I'm actually wearing a shirt here that has an onion on it just to illustrate some of the confusion on it. It's from the Perl Tool Chain Summit. It's an onion that has a chainsaw in it and an actual chain. So, and I don't know if the permission was granted for that. Okay, so how do we get new developers? That's sort of been a question for a while, but I think actually we've been doing it for a long time already. And they get created all the time. For instance, where I work, we hire people and they end up working on Perl, even if they haven't worked on it before. Ergo, you have a new Perl developer, whether they would like to be that or not. That's your job now. Now, are we giving these people great tools to work with? If you've used some language servers in other languages, like when I write in Bash, I use this Bash language server in Vim, and it's like it's constantly giving me these hints. It's like, don't do that. You need to quote this. Here, let me format that for you, like that kind of stuff. And we can kind of do this in Perl, but it's not as easy. And I think really that if we want to make working with Perl a pleasure, then we really should give people the editing tools that they need to make that easy. Especially like given like all the quirks around Perl. I should have a formatter that says, you know what, I'm just going to put use strict and use warnings in there for you, and I'm going to tidy it all up to make sure that it conforms with current Perl standards. And some of these things are hard to do, but they're not necessarily impossible to do. Now, please try out Perl Navigator. There is at least one other language server, but this one is actually really good. The maintainer is very responsive. He was at the hackathon last year. One other thing is I would say we could target VS Code because I think that's an editor that new people would be more likely to use. And it's actually pretty cool. I don't mostly use it myself, but I have been impressed when I have used it. So I think if we can get a lot of people using Perl Navigator, using it on VS Code, or using it as a language server like for Emacs or NeoVim, kicking the tires on these things, I think we can go a long way. There's also tree-sitter Perl, which supports NeoVim and Emacs, and this can be used for syntax highlighting as well. I've filed a bug report or two on this, and it's gotten fixed almost immediately. So if you are using tree-sitter in your editor, I highly recommend using this one. Again, there is a different tree-sitter implementation. Use this one. That would be okay, do what you want to do, but I would say this is a good one to use. It's sort of one of those things with Tim Toady again. Do we need two different tree-sitter implementations? Yep.
Can I suggest that to help your newcomers to your organization, just have an opinionated development environment for day one?
Yeah.
Once they get through, like, on code basis and stuff, building their own environment, but just on day one, give them an environment that they will succeed in, and they can help them. Like, don't be like, here's your brand new loader laptop, and here's an Ubuntu CD. Look, don't do that. Like, have them sit down. They don't like VS Code, but here it is, and here's our repos, and all that data is working, and you can make one more. You don't have to spend time installing them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Have them successful, and then as they get confident, and as they hate through the setup, they'll be confident. But like, yeah, that's my solution.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely. Like, not everybody likes to fiddle with settings and installing a bunch of things. Like, some of us just want to get up and get running. Like, it's frustrating too. Like, say, like it was again with the Bash language server. Like, it's just amazing. Like, it just works. And Bash, you know, there are some quirks to it, and if you're not aware of them, you can get bitten by it. Just the same ways with Perl, and just to be able to automate some of that stuff away is amazing. So as far as formatting goes, I'm going to say we've got it solved. That's basically a solved problem. There is there's possibly a bus number on this, but there's one very dedicated person making sure that our code is incredibly tidy. And there's one tool to go to. There is no try this other tidier. It's just that one, and that's great. Now for Perl Critic, we could use that for linting. Perl Navigator does have a default critic profile. This one is sort of open to improvements. So that might be something an interested person could go and have a look at and say, what are some of the policies that we could add to this so that someone who doesn't have Perl critic rules yet set up would get useful information from Perl Navigator. Now, as far as fixing, I believe Gugod wrote app Perl Nitpick, which is it's actually kind of genius. What it does is you could use it to take a Perl critic policy, figure out where the violations are, and then fix those, and then basically just rewrite the code. So very simple example, if there's no interpolation in a variable, you don't want to have double quotes, and you could just rewrite all those as single quotes. So things like that. So if you have like policies that you want to enforce on your code base, instead of forcing someone to fix all the quotes, you could just go ahead and do it like that. One that I would love to see is something that adds trailing commas to the last key value pair in a hash. Because I like to sort them, and when I go and sort them, and the last one doesn't have a comma on it, now I've got a problem. And I shouldn't have to. And also, you can use Perl imports where possible. This is something I talked about last year, but this is also something that can rewrite your code. It can take a look at the modules you've imported, and it can say, oh, you're actually importing these 3 things, but you're not using them. I'm going to remove those from your import statement. Or if you're doing implicit imports, so you don't have the brackets after your use statement, it can add those in for you just to make clear what you are and are not importing. And it will sort the imports as well. It's kind of like, it's very opinionated, it's my opinion, but definitely try it out. You can use it within the parameter of Perl Navigator as well, so you can auto-format your code. It's a bit slow on bigger stuff, but it's worth trying. Now, Dave Rolski wrote a tool called Precious, and you can use that to harness all your linters and tidiers. There's one on CPAN called Code Tidyall. This is the spiritual successor of that, but written in Rust. And it's fast and it's good. And so happy developers will make for happy managers. And I think that, if we can make this experience easy for everyone, then possibly there are less people pushing to say, get rid of this terrible Perl code out of our code base. I hate dealing with it. So as we start finding that we've got more things on pause, but less people to deal with them, what can we do more with less? Just like a business that's losing revenue, you got to find efficiencies and redundancies and things like that. So I think we need to just focus on getting more things into GitHub organizations so that it's not just one person who can release the code. Give more people co-main. Move to static site generators where we can. And then, as I spoke of before, we are basically a rudderless ship here, for better or for worse. I don't worry about Perl the language. They had a really rough time, and Sawyer did explain a lot of that. I feel like they're in a better place. It's unfortunate how they got to that place, but I feel like they've got a system in place now for dealing with decisions and requests for changes and things like that. We don't have anything like that for Perl as a whole. But we could look at who some of the stakeholders are. So we could look at TPRF. They do fundraising, grants, marketing, communication. From an outsider, I would say those are sort of the core competencies of TPRF. Other stakeholders, there's the Perl steering. Is it council or committee? I've also heard conspiracy. And they can make decisions about Perl the language itself. There's the Perl toolchain. They make decisions about pause, CPAN, testing, quality assurance, and they meet once a year in some place in Europe, usually. Whereas the Perl steering council committee, they meet, I believe, monthly. I would say Meta CPAN on some levels is a stakeholder. It's really part of the tool chain, but it is, in some sense, it's become the face of CPAN. A lot of new people, when they first Google a Perl module, they will end up at Meta CPAN. So we have some influence on how Perl is viewed. There are other active projects where we might want to include people in decision making, like how would this decision affect you? Can you help us embrace the shadowed camel as a logo? That kind of a thing. Thanks. And so, I mean, can we get these people together to meet? Could we get them in one room? Could we have a quarterly meeting for 90 minutes where some of these people get together and just try to coordinate? Is that possible? It would be an interesting experiment, say, with the logo to try and see if you can build a broad consensus about these communities. There's no benevolent dictator. At this point, it's too late to install someone to start calling the shots. So I think, yeah, very shortly, I guess, yeah. That's not so benevolent. So I think really there's this idea, like one of the cool things about Perl is that there are all these people moving in different directions and doing their own little projects and stuff, but it would be nice to be able to harness that energy and move some of it in the same direction. And I feel like that's what we're lacking here. So, I mean, the fact that not having a logo or a style guide or any kind of assets you can use when you want to do something that identifies Perl as a project you're working with. So TPRC does have a monthly meeting, and again, there's that same Slack invite. So if you want to be involved in those conversations, it's definitely an option for you. Now, I'm almost done, but things that are helpful to know that are probably not related to this, there's the Perl Planetarium, which has an RSS feed of a whole bunch of different things, including Stack Overflow questions and blog posts. It has an RSS feed, and yeah, check it out. It's quite helpful. There's also Dave Cross's CPAN dashboard. If you're an author, it can give you a quick overview of the quality scores and the build status and test coverage of your module. So that's pretty cool. And you just need to send a pull request. It took me like less than 5 minutes to get set up. And if you need Docker images for use locally or in GitHub Actions or whatever CI you're using, there's a project here that builds them nightly with Distilla pre-installed and a bunch of testing modules. And we just added Perl 5.3.8 last week. So in summary, how about a shadowed camel? Can we revive Perl.com? Can we have a really great, high-quality Perl editor experience? And what can we make it easier for new CPAN authors to thrive and existing ones too? All right, thank you.